Hello and welcome to today's live Democast. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Chris Shields. I head up product marketing here at Gurucul, and I will be moderating today's live session. I am joined by Jojo Brodamonte, one of our senior solution architects with over 20 years of experience in the cybersecurity space. Before we jump in, a couple quick housekeeping notes. First and foremost, please, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the Democast, and we'll answer questions at the end. And if we don't have time, we don't get to your questions, we'll be sure to answer them offline. You can submit questions at any time. Usually within 48 hours, you will get a link, a thank you email with a link to the recording so you can watch this at your leisure. And lastly, sometimes BrightTalk defaults to 480p. Don't ask me why. So if your resolution doesn't look so great, you can click on the settings button at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, I think, and increase your resolution as necessary. SIEMs have gotten a bad rap with declining detections, skyrocketing costs, inadequate visibility, and control over your data. It's certainly understandable, but here's where we flip those myths on their head. In this Democast, we debunk the myth that SIEMs fail to deliver value. We'll cover how the Gurucul REVEAL security analytics platform can help you reduce costs while enhancing your visibility and mitigate organizational risk. And with that, I will turn it over to Jojo for the demo.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Or thanks. Thanks, Chris. So, just kind of starting off here, let me just share my screen real quick. Oops. All right. So I want to first talk about what are the typical costs that we see, in today's SIEMs, or at least other SIEMs. Most of them customers, think that they need to pull in all types of data into their SIEM so that they get the best visibility, from their SIEM. But if the SIEM is licensed based on ingestion, this can easily increase the cost of their SIEM. But then to reduce the ingestion, volume that's coming in, they think now I've got to bring in a third-party tool to help with filtering, the logs that gets ingested, so that I don't, pull in too much data. However, there's added cost to that, third-party filtering tool. Some SIEM customers are also seeing value, aren't seeing value with the current analytics that they're getting from their SIEM. So then they also want to bring in, a better analytics, capability. So they bring in, for example, a UEBA analytics from another tool. So again, adding additional cost to, the overall SIEM solution. Or if they don't have case management or they don't have the ability to do SOAR, then they might bring in, other tools for those capabilities. However, with Gurucul, we provide all of these capabilities that I just mentioned, all in a single platform that we call REVEAL. So we do have, SIEM, we have UEBA, we have SOAR, we have all of these different capabilities all within the same platform. So it's just a matter of licensing to enable, the particular component, but it's all one single platform, one single data ingestion, point. As you can see, all the data gets brought in one single place, all the analytics, and then based on the licensing, we enable all the different components and so forth, and in one single data lake within the platform. So now let's talk about, how Gurucul can provide, additional value. Let's first talk about lowering the cost. Traditionally, when you think of, a SIEM, again, you want to provide as much data as you can to get as much analytics and visibility, right? So, but if the SIEM again is licensed for ingestion, that can become very, very costly. And now you have to think about, how do you prioritize what data and data sources you want to send to the SIEM and keep that cost down. So the way Gurucul does this is we have a data optimizer component which allows you to do just that, what we're asking here, or we're talking about. Data Optimizer provides the ability to reduce that ingestion, but still get the most value out of the data that's being ingested. And the way it works is that we already know what is the most relevant, data for our analytics. So we optimize the data ingestion per source type, I should say, and filter out non-relevant data and only allow relevant data to our SIEM platform for the analytics. However, the non-relevant data can still be forked, as you can see here, forked to other locations. They can be forked to long-term storage, for compliance, regulation needs or requirements. They can be forked to other third-party data lakes, etc. However, that data that is forked to other storage can still be searched and visible within the platform through another capability called federated search within our platform, and I'll show you that in a demo. So let's actually jump into the platform so I can show you some of these capabilities from a data optimization perspective. So let me stop sharing. And now let me share my UI.
Unified UI.
Absolutely, unified UI. So let me know if I'm showing the correct screen now.
Yep, we gotcha.
All right. So let me jump into my data optimizer UI. So you can see that I could, first of all, I could use my drop down on dashboard, so I can go and jump from one dashboard to another, right? So let me go into my data optimization, UI. So this is, again, this is showing, or what this is showing is that here we have, the total volume that's coming in, into the data optimizer, and this is what is being, then after the optimization, this is how much data is now being filtered through to our SIEM platform, and you can look at it from an EPS standpoint or from a, megabytes, gigabytes perspective standpoint as well. But the point is, this is the incoming data. However, this is the outgoing data after it's been optimized. And the way we're doing that, again, is through our data ingestion pipeline process. So as I mentioned before, we have built-in filters that already optimizes the data based on our knowledge of what's relevant in data, in the different data source types. So if I look at Windows security, for example, we have a parser logic here that all actually already filters the data, and so we can go in here and determine, again, what is the most relevant event IDs that we want to now push or allow to the SIEM platform. Everything else, again, you have a choice of what you want to do with that. You can then you can drop that data if you want, or you can filter it and then, or I should say, allow it to go to fork it out to a different location, such as in this case, our Gurucul cloud for long-term retention, storage perspective, right? But this could be, a different data lake. It could be, your own storage infrastructure, wherever it might be. It could even be, other tools. So you have the ability to specify where you want that data to go to. Now, once that data is filtered, or I should say routed, again, to a different storage, you can then use our federated search to still search for that data or look for that data from an analysis standpoint. It's not going to go through, any of our models, but you can still run searches against it. So for example, here, if I want to go and look at some of the Windows logs, for example, I can then just query directly from, the same UI and put just query, all Windows logs, for example, through our federated search. And now I can see all of the additional, Windows data, and et cetera, right through that federated search. Okay, so now let's take a look at how Gurucul can also provide, from a value perspective, better visibility. So let me quickly just go back to my normal dashboard. Okay, my TDIR dashboard. All right, so how else can Gurucul provide value? Well, as an analyst, there are hidden costs, in a SIEM, for analysts workflow, right? How long does it take for the analyst to find the value from the data that they're seeing from the SIEM platform? How quickly can they determine what's important and what's critical in the environment? How can they easily prioritize alerts, for example, from hundreds or thousands of alerts, down to the most relevant and critical alerts? So with Gurucul, we have a risk engine. It's a very robust risk engine that automatically applies risk scores to all users and entities, as well as all the alerts that are triggering in the environment. For example, users are given a risk score from 0 to 100. And it's based on multiple criteria. So if a user is found to be detected for some sort of activity, they're given a risk score for that activity. However, we also use context information about that user. For example, does that user have rights to the resources they are accessing? Is the activity they're doing a deviation from the normal activity, or is it different from what their peers are doing? So that all impacts that risk score. So it's not about just the activity that they're doing, but it's also other context about that particular user or even system. We also have an incident, our own built-in incident management capability, where one or more alerts can bubble up into and auto-generate a case. So that's all found under the Incidents tab. So this allows analysts to, again, identify the most risky cases in which they can then prioritize their workflow. As I mentioned before, a case can be one to multiple alerts, individual alerts, each one having their own risk scores, right? So medium risk scores here, but then they bubble up to a point to where it auto generates this case, and that begins that workflow. Which we can integrate with third-party ticketing systems or third-party incident response management systems to automatically generate a ticket on those tools or an incident in those tools. But also it's built into the Gurucul platform. So now the analysts can then begin their workflow and start to drill into this. So for example, if the analyst drills into Henry Jacob further, they are taken to the user analyst as well as timeline view, where in one single UI or one single window, they can now understand what's going on with this user, why has this user been flagged, and so forth, and actually look at all the related alerts to that particular case that they drill down on. So from here, we now know who the user is. We know the title. We know, who the manager is, and so forth. And we have that information because we integrate with, user data such as Active Directory, HR data, and so forth. So without having to jump into a different, UI or different tool, we have all the information about this particular user. We're also able to, determine, is this user's activity, is it different from their peers, right? So we're looking at their peers and seeing if this user's activity is anomalous based on their peers' activity. Of course, we're pulling in data from all types of different sources. And if this user has multiple accounts, we're also linking all of those different accounts that this user could be using to the same, unique identifier, which in this case could be their employee ID. If this user has been found on a watch list, we can also then use, our analytics to then automatically increase their user's overall risk score, excuse me, because this user is now found to be on a watch list, that will automatically, increase that risk score by a certain percentage. Now, of course, all of this is all configurable. So let's take a look at, what the screen is telling us. First of all, we can see that this user's risk score has been, essentially 0. All of a sudden, we see an increase in their risk score. Why is that? Well, below that, we see, some detections, right? So we can mouse over that, and we can see whatever the detections are. At the same time, we can also view those detections in a nice timeline view, where we can look at the detections, or the alerts individually. So here we first start off with, the fact that, Gurucul has the ability to bring in threat intel feeds, such as data breach records. And here we could see that this user's records were found on a data breach record. And so that's been, then we've given that user a medium risk score. Fine. Then we started seeing some activity about this user. First we see a phishing attempt, right? Using a potential homoglyph, domain pattern discovery, type of phishing attack where they're, obfuscating or using, a domain that looks very similar to, a real domain, but it's given, it's making the user provide some sort of action. And so, of course, the user probably saw this as like, oh, this is coming from Gurucul and it's coming from corporate IT. Therefore, let me go ahead and, whatever that tells me, let me go ahead and follow those instructions. Well, of course, this is, a phishing attack. This then triggers other activities such as, rare inbound email, and so forth. What it also triggered is one of our chain models where it actually saw, multiple email, attempts or from that same user, and it was done after we saw the actual, phishing attack, right? So we saw the phishing attack and we saw multiple emails that triggered, a multiple model chain. So I'll talk about chain models here in shortly, but it's a much higher risk score, as you can see, which then also you can see some additional other activities such as, attempts from login successful attempts from, rare devices or from, rare ISPs and so forth. So again, we now have visibility to all of this user's activities. We are mapping to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which we can click on to get more additional information. But again, the visibility of all of these different, detections, all in a single UI. So before we go into further within this use case, let's talk about how Gurucul also provides, reduction in risk. Again, so there's a number of different ways in which we can do this. First, we provide, an open analytics platform in that we allow customers to access all of these models that you see here. So this is all done through a tool called Studio. Okay. So within Studio, analysts, not analysts per se, but really the administrators of the platform can then go to any of our models and actually customize our models. They can view our models, but they can also customize any of the models as well. So let me just pull up an example model for you. So this is one of our existing models. First of all, so you have the ability to clone a model, right? So then you can then make customizations to this. And then once you clone it, you can then preview it, and test it out. How is this model running? Is it running the way I want it to run? And once you've determined it's running correctly, then you can enable that particular model. But the way these models work is, first we identify, is the model running against a user or a system? This is also optional as far as, it can also just be based on, the detection itself. We can also provide more focused on which is the data source it's coming from. It could be very general as far as, hey, it's just a proxy versus, specific, Zscaler proxy here. but the model itself is going to be based on, a template. These templates are going to be our machine learning, our pattern-based recognition, or it can also be just a simple correlation, rule. But these templates are something that we provide out of the box, but they're not customizable. However, what you can customize are things such as, the baseline time period. How long do you want to run this model? Who do you want to run this model against? What are some of the other things you want to run? You want to apply filters on and so forth. So you can make all these different customizations to modify this model to make it, to tweak and tune it based on your own specific requirements. Now, the other thing I mentioned was that we had the ability to provide threat chaining capability. So the way that works is, let me just pull up an example chain model here. Is that, again, the way this works is that we have the ability to look at multiple models in a if then else type of scenario, right? So in this case, we're looking to see if we see a detection from a Zscaler proxy, for example, or against a specific host, and we see a malicious payload downloaded on that host, followed by some time later, through a different data source, we actually see a high severity EDR alert. Now, each model by themselves will have their own risk score, right? It could be a medium risk score, or maybe not high enough risk score to trigger, or generate a case. But because we saw multiple models triggering on the same entity, on the same host or the same user, this chain model then would be a much higher focused risk score, or higher risk score, which would then, help reduce, false positives. Reducing that risk with regards to being able to alert the user on a much more higher critical, activity. So this is just an example, again, of a way Gurucul provides that, lowering that risk. Now, another way that we can provide lowering that risk is, let me just kind of go back to the, the same workflow we were doing before, is that during the user's, analysis, they can actually drill down into this even further, right? They could go into our investigate. Now it's going to pre-populate. They don't have to actually go in here and provide any kind of queries. It's going to automatically pre-populate the data. And it's also highlighting the most important, metadata information about those detections. But what the analyst can do here is the analyst can actually use our built-in SOAR capability to apply a playbook. For example, they can right-click on this particular user now, execute a playbook, and let's say, for example, they want to, disable that particular user's account, right? So with Gurucul's built-in SOAR capability, you have the ability to, either manually, execute a playbook such as disabling an account, isolating or quarantining a host, blocking a port or an IP address on a firewall, for example, using any one of our built-in integrations in our playbook. So that's one way a user can do that. But however, these playbooks can also be executed automatically based on a detection. So here I can show you that, within our response, with our built-in response part of our source solution, again, we have all these built-in playbooks out of the box. But some of these playbooks, you can also trigger based on, a auto trigger based on a model executing. So for example, I can even use, that chain model that we were looking at earlier, this threat chain. So when that threat chain occurs, right, we can then auto trigger, a particular playbook. And then those playbooks can be decision based, right? So, based on a particular decision, whatever that decision is, we can either do multiple actions, such as, go ahead and create a ServiceNow, ticket, and then maybe, quarantine that host or delete a file or whatever it might be. If it's false, let's just go ahead and update the case itself. So again, providing that multiple action capability versus decision-wise from a SOAR perspective, as well as either automatically or manually executing, a playbook. So again, in conclusion, Gurucul has, multiple ways in which you can provide value, compared to some of the, SIEM vendors out there. But we showed you those 3 different ways in which you can do that. But at this point, I'll go ahead and turn this back over to Chris, so he can go ahead and conclude this democast.